Today, the Secretary of Defense testified to Congress for the first time since his boss started a war with no stated purpose, no strategy, and no clear endgame 58 days ago. And during that testimony in front of the House Armed Services Committee, Pete Hegseth reminded all of us that during this time of war, we have the most unqualified, the most unprepared, and the most clownish person ever to serve in that role.
Do you think we're winning?
Militarily on the battlefield, it's been an astounding military success.
No, but are we winning the war?
Absolutely.
Okay, so do you call Iran closing the Strait of Hormuz winning?
Well, I would say the blockade that we hold that doesn't allow anything to come in or out of Iranian ports.
Okay, so we've blockaded their blockade. So they blockaded us, and then we blockaded their blockade. That's like saying, tag, you're it.
I mean, what? I mean, good on Congressman Moulton for keeping a straight face during that exchange, of course. But it didn't stop there. There's much more. And before I play this next one, remember for months now, Hegseth and the entire Trump administration have justified the need for the war with Iran by saying that Iran was dangerously close to developing a nuclear weapon. That's been their mantra. Now, today, Hegseth couldn't seem to keep that story straight.
Their nuclear facilities have been obliterated. Underground, they're buried, and we're watching them 24/7. So we know where any nuclear material
reclaiming
might be.
my time for
we're
just a quick second here. We had to start this war, you just said, 60 days ago, because the nuclear weapon was an imminent threat. Now you're saying that it was completely obliterated?
They had not given up their nuclear ambitions.
I mean, the look on Adam Smith's face says it all. Okay, so with that logic, bombing is not about destroying the facilities. It's about making them give up their ambitions through bombing. How does that work exactly? And then there was what he had to say about the cost of the war.
Will you acknowledge the economic cost? We have an incredible economic team that's managing this better than what the previous administration did to our economy, what the previous administration did with inflation, what the previous administration did with COVID, and you're going to lecture this administration about the economy?
You know what is upsetting?
Incredible.
You didn't even do the analysis on how much it's costing the American people. You don't even know what the average American is paying. You don't know what we paid in terms of the missiles that hit the Iranian school. You don't know what we're paying in terms of gas. You don't know what we're paying in terms of food. Your 25 billion number is totally off. It's the incompetence.
And in a hearing that had a lot of alarming moments, the most damning one came when Hegseth was asked about the 6 Army Reserve soldiers who were killed by an Iranian drone strike in Kuwait on the first day of the war. It remains the deadliest attack on U.S. forces since the Iran war began. 6 troops were killed, dozens were wounded. And at the time, this was how Hegseth explained what happened.
You have air defenses, and the lot's coming in, and you hit most of it, and we absolutely do. We have incredible air defenders. Every once in a while, you might have one, unfortunately, we call it a squirter that makes its way through, and in that particular case, it happened to hit a tactical operations center that was fortified, but these are powerful weapons.
It appears that was a lie. Survivors of the attack told CBS News that area was not fortified. In fact, this particular unit was left dangerously exposed, as they described it. One soldier raised serious questions about why he and other troops were moved to this command post in Kuwait, which U.S. intelligence showed was on an Iranian target list. And in the interview I'm about to show you, CBS hid that soldier's identity because he was speaking out without the military's permission.
We moved closer to Iran, to a deeply unsafe area that was a known target.
So what was the reason that you were told for why you needed to be there?
I don't think there was a good reason ever articulated.
This horrific tragedy and that disgusting response from Pete Hegseth, all of it came to a head today when Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan of New York, a combat veteran and Bronze Star recipient, got his 5 minutes with Hegseth.
Head wounds, heavy bleeding, and then just shrapnel all over. So folks are bleeding from their abdomen, bleeding from arms, bleeding from legs. Secretary Hegseth, do you know who said that?
I'm not sure I do.
It was one of our soldiers describing the devastating Iranian drone strike at Port Shuaibah. Prior to the attack, officers on the ground knew our troops were vulnerable. In fact, they requested additional force protection. Did they receive it?
wherever humanly possible, force protection and counter UAS was always made available.
They did not.
Now, Congressman Ryan was just getting started, and things only got more heated and tense from there.
So let's be clear, no counter-drone capabilities, no counter-rocket systems, no counter-mortar or counter-artillery, not even the basic overhead protection that you and I had 20 years ago in Iraq, and now 6 of our soldiers are dead. The next day, you downplayed the attack. You said it was a squirter that squeaked through fortified defenses. So are you saying that these soldiers, our soldiers who survived this horrific attack, are lying?
What I'm saying is before the commencement of the conflict, we put in maximum defensive posture we could.
That's a direct
We moved
contradiction
70
to what they said.
in this directing. Can I speak, or are you just going to monologue falsehoods all over the place?
It's not a falsehood.
We moved 7,500 troops off of the X based on the intel.
Stop.
Based on the intel.
Stop. Reclaiming my time.
Because you yell doesn't make you right.
Calling,
Just because you yell doesn't make you right.
I'm reclaiming my time on behalf of these survivors. You just said what they said is a falsehood.
Hegseth appeared to be performing grossly for an audience of one, as usual, knowing Donald Trump was likely watching. But to everyone else, he just looked like a liar and a fool. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Pat Ryan of New York. What was going through your head?
The brazenness of literally, these are surviving troops who, by the way, were so intimidated by Hegseth's sort of fear and intimidation campaign that they came forward, but they felt that they needed to be anonymized for their own protection. And I know a big part of that was they felt like him not taking this seriously. I mean, we have 50,000 more troops right now in the theater. And if we don't learn those lessons, that's putting them all at risk. And to see Hegseth just try to basically bully his way through that rather than taking accountability, it was pathetic. And so I was pissed. Not just personally, but you think about those soldiers we lost, the 30 wounded, their families. It's just so disrespectful.
We've seen you speak at campaign events passionately. We've seen you, speak on the floor about a range of issues. It seems like Secretary Hegseth particularly gets under your skin and what he has to say. Tell us more about that.
It is both personal, but it's personal because I really do think him being in this position of such grave responsibility and seriousness is just such an insult to the people that are serving, that are doing the right things, that are doing it in an apolitical way from a patriotic place of good faith. And then he comes in there today, for example, and in his opening remarks deliberately chooses to say our greatest threat is not China or Russia or Iran, who we're at war with, by the way. It's Democrats and some Republicans, he said, who are whatever he said, whatever garbage BS he said. I mean, that in and of itself is both stunning and tells you everything you need to know about how he thinks about his job.
I found it also stunning, and it was at the very beginning of the hearing.
Set the tone.
And just thinking about how many secretaries of defense we've heard testify, it completely stood out to me as well. There were so many different moments during this hearing, which I think exposed a lot for the public about what's going on here. You and I have talked about this a fair amount. One of your Democratic colleagues, Congresswoman Houlihan, asked Hegseth to basically just give an order of magnitude of how much longer he thought it would take before the operation concluded. He said he wouldn't say how long he'd be committed to the mission. He just wouldn't give any sort of a timeline, like we're not going to telegraph that to the enemy. That is something I think every single person watching right now, every person in this country would love to have a sense of. These are our men and women who are serving, our resources, and so many other impacts. What did you make of that refusal?
Every day, every American is paying the price, some in blood and lives lost, all of us at the gas pump, at the grocery store, and so on and so forth. And they've tried to do this bizarre logical pretzel twist where they say, oh, remember how long it took in Iraq and Afghanistan and World War II he talked about
Vietnam
today? And then at the same time, but these are different. These are different. And what we're trying to say is no, we're actually concerned that you're setting us up for that same sort of year after year quagmire situation that I served and fought in, and that we all learned in Iraq and Afghanistan was not what we wanted to do. So it's like cognitive dissonance at a level that can only be explained by this blind fealty to Trump. And Hegseth's whole performance today, and it was a performance, was an audience of one to keep his own job and not do his job, which is care for our troops and keep the American people safe.
I wanted to play you a question that your Democratic colleague, you were sitting there, but for people who didn't see it, Congressman Moulton asked today on Hegseth's no quarter comments. And we've talked about this before. So I just wanted to play this and get your thoughts about how he responded.
In a press conference, you said we will give them no quarter, no mercy. In order for no quarter or no survivors is a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. You understand that's murder. Do you stand by that statement?
The Department of War fights to win, and we ensure that our warfighters have the rules of engagement necessary to be as effective as humanly possible.
Okay, so just to be clear, you called Democratic members of Congress to be tried for sedition for reminding our troops to follow the law. But when you tell them to commit a war crime, you stand by yourself.
For insinuating that the laws...
You could kind of see the disgust on Congressman Moulton's face there, but what did you make of that moment?
Again, a moment of deep hypocrisy. Hegseth himself in 2016 publicly reminded us that soldiers and military folks are required to follow lawful orders. But now that he's in this position, again, fealty to Trump comes first. And it is discussed, especially for those of us that served in uniform. He has brought an office we all held in such great regard, the Secretary of Defense, where you want a wise, sober, serious leader, down to not even in a weekday Fox News host, a weekend Fox News host. And that's, again, what we saw on display today.
I look forward to sharing the incredible successes of our military, achieved in a matter of weeks. President Trump, unlike other presidents, has had the courage to ensure Iran never gets a nuclear weapon, and he's ironclad in that. We have the best negotiator in the world driving that deal. The biggest challenge, the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats and some Republicans.
How sad. How sad, first of all, that a child is allowed to hold that position, an immature child that doesn't even understand. There's so many things he doesn't understand. But the first thing he doesn't understand is that the people that are on that committee are members of the Armed Services Committee. And as a former member of the Armed Services Committee, I can tell you most of those people have military bases in their district. Most of those people represent the men and women in uniform that fight for this country, that are deployed across the world, that are deployed across the Middle East. And their first concern is the safety and the security of those soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guard members. That's their concern. And this guy acts like a punk, a little punk, saying that those members of the Armed Services Committee, who mind you, are actually fulfilling the oath before country and God that they gave and following the orders, not of one president, but of our founding fathers in the Constitution in Article 1, to have oversight over an administration, any administration, just like we did with the Clinton administration, just like we did with the Bush administration, just like Republicans did with the Obama administration. That is what they take an oath to do. And Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, just said that these Article 1 representatives were a greater adversary to America than Iran's Revolutionary Guard, than Iran's mullahs, a greater adversary than all of those groups, the terrorist proxy groups that are trying to kill our soldiers every day. Isn't it pretty remarkable? Pretty remarkable that We've been lectured by MAGA world over the past week that you can't say anything. You can't say, oh, the president's acting like an authoritarian because you may get him killed. Oh, the president is actually, he's acting like a fascist, or he's using fascist rhetoric. So you can't say that. You can't say that because you might cause people to shoot him, as if the two go together. And here you have Pete Hegseth saying that members of Congress doing their constitutional job are greater threats than the Revolutionary Guard. And listen, just for the record, as Jonathan Chait pointed out in The Atlantic a couple of days ago, Donald Trump regularly calls his opponents that he disagrees with communists, traitors, people who need to be shot in the face. So it's just such nonsense. It really is. And I understand hacks doing it. I understand hacks. But when the Wall Street Journal editorial page and the National Review goes down that tired line, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So here we have, Willie, a Secretary of Defense that says the greatest adversary to U.S. troops right now, not the Revolutionary Guard, but members of Congress who want to know, I don't know, basic things. How much money have we spent there? We finally got the answer yesterday. What actually are the reasons why we went to war? Because he really still didn't give us a clearly defined answer. He did say, I'm glad he said it, there can never be a nuclear Iran. So if he decides, and this administration decides to cut and run, while Iran still has nuclear weapons, then, well, I guess by his own definition, there's a failure. But another thing happened yesterday, and I swear to God, it's just, I don't know if they're children or they think that everybody that follows them are children. But we heard once again yesterday them kind of juggling the ball, saying, we destroyed Iran's nuclear capability. Oh, okay, great. We have to go to war because Iran's 2 weeks away from having a nuclear weapon. Wait, but you destroyed it a year ago. Now you're saying they're 2 weeks away. And we had the same sort of tap dance yesterday. We can't leave until their nuclear program's destroyed. Oh, the president destroyed their nuclear program. So this whole thing, again, it's an embarrassing exercise. And I do mean this. He's not only... It's not only embarrassing for the United States of America. I keep saying this. It's embarrassing for the Republican Party. It's embarrassing for the President of the United States, who deserves and needs somebody better running the Pentagon than this child who embarrasses Donald Trump every time he goes out and talks.
Yeah, these performances that we see from Pete Hegseth once a week or so are designed to humor the president, to please the president, to get a pat on the back from the president. But as you say, they're not helping the president in this war effort at all. And any basic question, the ones you just laid out, how much does the war cost? Did you not see the consequences of war, like the Strait of Hormuz potentially being closed, which every former military leader we've had on this show said that's one of the first questions you ask. When the subject of Iran comes up, the next question is, what about the Strait of Hormuz? The cost of gas is now $4.23. All of these consequences, all of these outcomes, did you not consider them? And the response to that from Secretary Hegseth yesterday is, why do you hate America? Why are you rooting against the war? You're the actual bad guys. If you deign to criticize or ask questions about this war, you're rooting against America. That's just not how it works here in America, Jonathan Lemire. But President Trump seems to like Secretary Hegseth, likes his combativeness, likes the way he performs. He's sort of adopted the language of Donald Trump. And so there he sits at the head of the Pentagon as this war drags on, frankly, with no end in sight.
Secretary Hegseth, frankly, doesn't have that many allies or friends within the White House, but he has the only one that matters. President Trump likes him, loves the performative outrage that we see in those briefings at the Pentagon and likely yesterday. It's worth highlighting this. We just showed what Hegseth said, that the biggest adversary we face at this point are the reckless, feckless, and defeatist words of congressional Democrats. A few moments later, when General Kane gave his opening remarks, he included a line about General George C. Marshall's commitment to a nonpartisan military, saying, quote, that remains a constant standard and something I borrow from often. So General Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, saying what you should say there. The military is not supposed to be political.
Yes.
Secretary Hegseth not doing the same. And we, as Willie just said, there are real ramifications for this war. There are no negotiations planned. The Strait of Hormuz is shut. Yes, U.S. officials believe the blockade is working, but we have a long way to go. And overnight, oil prices surged, hitting a fresh wartime high, Joe and Mika.
Right.
And right now, the Trump administration is looking for a way out without an obvious answer.
Well, let's commend General Kane, first of all, for using as his North Star General George Marshall, who never voted in an election. As his father never voted in an election, he always stayed away from politics, did everything he could to do that. He was a soldier first. And so when you see this petulant display, I can say, people can say, oh, Donald Trump likes it. I don't know. He didn't like it when Pam Bondi did it. And yesterday reminded me of Pam Bondi's performance, the worst performance on Capitol Hill, I think, certainly I've ever seen before the Armed Services Committee. When you actually tell Republicans and Democrats that they are a greater adversary than the Revolutionary Guard, that they are a greater adversary than the mullahs, the ayatollahs in Iran, that they're a greater adversary than the government that has actually run a state that's the epicenter of terrorism since 1979. And here's what is lost for President Trump. Oil prices are going up. If you actually had a grown-up go in there and explain, listen, we understand oil prices are going up and we feel terrible for the American people. This is what we're calculating, though. Mm-hmm. We need to keep the blockade in place because we understand we've degraded their military targets. Our military's the best in the world. They can't do any better than they've done, and we're just so damn proud of them. But at this point, the real pressure point with the Iranians is now economic. We've done everything we can do militarily, and we've done it well, and we're so proud of that. But now our military is going to be used to choke their economy off. And that, at the end of the day, is what's going to bring them to the negotiating table. So we can have a safe Iran. We can have a safe region. We can have a safe world free from a nuclear Iran. If the right person had said that for the Trump administration, people would understand, okay, yes, oil's going to go up for the next week or two. But on the other side of it, you have the UAE proving what great allies they are, getting out of OPEC because they say they want to be reliable partners to the United States. So there was a way to do that.
Yeah.
But because he decided to go full Bondi, and
that was full Bondi.
Yeah. Willie, I think we all know this. You never go full Bondi, right? You never go full Bondi.
No.
It never works. And he went full Bondi. Man, you don't go full Bondi.
You don't do it.
He went full Bondi.
You've just cited a new term, I think, that's going to be used throughout the briefings that we've seen from Secretary Hegseth. By the way, your point about the nuclear program and ambitions is an important one because despite what he was saying yesterday, in June of 2025, after Operation Midnight Hammer, Secretary Hegseth said, quote, Iran's nuclear ambitions have been obliterated. It's over. That was 10 months ago. And now the defense of the war, which is,
strike up the band.
It's warranted if there's still nuclear material in the nuclear program. He says, no. We've got to stop. We might have wiped out their capabilities, but they still have the ambition. That's why we have to keep fighting in Iran.
Let's look at the big picture. With us, author and staff writer for The Atlantic, Anne Applebaum, and decorated combat veteran and former commander of U.S. Army Europe, retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Herdling, who we are happy to say is joining MS now as a military analyst.
And that is a reason to strike up the band. We're gonna get on to Ukraine in a minute, General, because so much is going on right now. We are literally seeing history move before our eyes. It's extraordinary what the Ukrainians are doing every day. But I want to first have you comment on what we saw yesterday. It's too easy, quite frankly, to continue criticizing this child's performance. What I'd like you to tell our viewers is What should a mature SecDef in the middle of a war said to Congress yesterday? What would you have liked to hear?
Yeah, Joe, it's a great question because, first of all, we have to review what this hearing was supposed to be all about. The center point of this hearing was to defend a $1.45 trillion request for a bump up in the Defense Department budget. I didn't hear a whole lot of discussion about the budget at all. That's a 40% increase in what they were initially given by the NDAA. So that kind of fell by the wayside. And the second thing I'd say, having testified before members of Congress myself, the disrespect that was shown by the Secretary of Defense to the organization that has First Amendment powers of basically questioning different department heads about what they're doing in an oversight role was just, to me, beyond the pale. There was smirks, there was bad body language, there was arguments, there was over-talking. And again, having myself testified before Congress, that's just not a way to win the approval of the budget that you're trying to submit. There's 50%, almost 50% of the Congress now that just sees the secretary as someone who is going to bluster, who's going to talk about things, who's going to overtalk and not answer questions. So in and of itself, even some of the answers he was giving in terms of the cost of the war, trying to answer good questions about potential war crimes that were committed, responsibility and accountability of him and the force. There is no one questioning the actions of the U.S. military. They have been magnificent in what they have been asked to do. I have not seen a single person say that, the military actions have been bad. What the question is what's the end state? What comes after the military? What hits the next sets of decisive points in Iran, according to the theorist Jomini? And how do you get to the center of gravity to get them at the negotiating table? That's all by the wayside right now. And it's just confusing to me how he can, to use your term, go full Bondi and expect any kind of coordination with the members of Congress who give him the money that he needs for the Defense Department.
He went full Bondi. You never go full Bondi. Let me say this in a way that the president may understand, and I'm dead serious. Not only is it disrespectful, I know the president has no problem with that, but I've sat through hundreds of these hearings on the Armed Services Committee. It's ineffective. It's ineffective.
It seemed desperate,
it's ineffective to everybody. Republicans and Democrats that may be split on other issues will come together afterwards, and they'll stick it to him every chance they get moving forward. It's ineffective. It's like using a 60 wedge, when you're driving on a par 5, or taking out a driver when you're 20 yards from the green. Nobody does it. There's a reason they don't do it. It's ineffective. So Pete Hegseth went full Bondi, and it's only going to hurt him with the committee. It's only going to hurt him with the Congress. It's only going to hurt him with this war effort.
So, Senators joins me now. Tammy Duckworth, thank you very much for taking the time out of the hearing to be with us. We've got a lot to cover, and I want to start, if I can, with a claim that Secretary Hegseth made about the 60-day deadline to get congressional authorization for the war in Iran. I want to play that exchange.
Is the president intending to either seek congressional authorization for the war in Iran or send us the legally required certification that he needs an additional 30 days to remove U.S. forces from the war?
Ultimately, I would defer to the White House and White House counsel on that. However, we are in a ceasefire right now, which our understanding means the 60-day clock pauses or stops in a ceasefire. You're not in. Yeah. It's our understanding, just so you know.
Okay, well, I do not believe the statute would support that.
Senator, is it your understanding that the 60-day clock on the War Powers Resolution is currently stopped because of a ceasefire, and so tomorrow the president would not be required to seek congressional approval or end hostilities?
Yeah, there's no stopping the clock. He has a maximum of 60 days to come to Congress to justify the war, and he's supposed to provide us with evidence and proof of imminent danger, that, you know, we were going to come under attack imminently. The last day that he can do that is tomorrow. So this is a fake deadline that they've come up with by reading the law backwards. But this is what the Trump administration does, is they keep firing legal counsels until they get one who will say exactly what they want to say. And now, as we approach their fake 60-day deadline, I'm imploring my Republican colleagues to stop abandoning their constitutional duty and finally join us in reining in Trump's disastrous, costly war. But no, there's no stopping of the clock. The statute says nothing about that.
So could he be the president, if he doesn't take those actions tomorrow, be setting up a constitutional clash that could unfold over the next couple of weeks?
Yes, very much so. And I'm outraged that Senate Republicans continue to cede their constitutional authority to this warmongering wannabe dictator of a president. I mean, he's hell-bent on throwing our service members into needless danger, breaking every single promise he's made to the American people, and he's not taking care of business here at home. And now, you know, there's this, what they've got, their fake justification, and frankly, he's already spent, $25 billion at least. I think that's a lowball number, and it's not helping Americans here at home.
There's another question that was raised by your colleague, Senator Mazie Hirono. Let me play that exchange.
Did you order the review to support a potential decision to overturn the policy of having women in combat roles?
We are laser focused on standards. The highest male standard for every combat arms position should be the standard. And 10 years into this, we are reviewing it, which is what the American people would expect.
Will you make the study public?
Will you make that study?
Yes or no?
We're doing the study for that very reason, to ensure that real science is applied to this question and not social engineering like the previous administration.
Yeah, I want to expand on that because he said earlier, Secretary Hegseth did, he accused Democrats on the committee and the previous Defense Department of being focused on, and I'm quoting him here, hype, social engineering, gender, race in ways we think, he says, were unhealthy for the department. You served in the Reserve Forces for 23 years before retiring at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. What's your reaction to that?
Well, Pete Hegseth is an incompetent fool. He is a misogynist, and he's been trying to get rid of women's role in our military. He obviously must have lost out a promotion to a female service member at some point and is, on a personal vendetta. But bottom line, in the testimony, he said, we are doing this to the highest male standard, as if there were only two standards in the military. And in fact, the physical fitness standards are actually graduated based on age as well. So a 40-year-old serviceman does not have to run the 2 miles as fast as an 18-year-old serviceman. So it is also differentiated by age as well as by gender. And frankly, as someone who served in a combat arms branch, and I volunteered to serve in the first combat arms branch that actually accepted women into combat roles, which is as a helicopter pilot. I know what the experience is. I know that our women who have met those standards have met the standards. They're doing their jobs. They are actually out there participating and taking care of the business at hand. And frankly, our nation's military could not go to war without its female service members. And yet, Pete Hegseth is on this personal vendetta. In fact, he's fired every female four-star general. And try to stop the additional promotion of 2 African-American women generals from getting additional stars. And that's why, the former Army Chief of Staff quit.
Let me ask you finally, some House Democrats voiced frustration after yesterday's hearing that they didn't get the answers they were looking for from the secretary. Some even accused Hegseth of lying. Your colleague, Senator Blumenthal, just said that he was surprised by the, quote, willful blindness and self-delusion coming out of that room. So if that is a majority opinion among Democrats and maybe even a Republican or two, is there anything you can do about this? Is there any real power in oversight, Senator?
Well, this is where we take it to the American people who have the ultimate oversight, right? The American people can see that these folks are lying. Donald Trump said he's winning the war. Pete Hegseth all day today for the last 3 hours is talking about how well he's doing. He's not doing well. He's incompetent. Our military men and women, they're doing their jobs well. They always have been. They're the highly trained, highly proficient professionals. But unfortunately, their civilian leadership in Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump are incompetent. They're burning billions of taxpayer dollars. Americans are not better off. The Strait of Hormuz is now mined. We've taught Iran that they can charge $1 million a ship to go through the Strait of Hormuz. Trump's illegal war of choice is forcing prices up and putting Americans in needless dangers. And it's already cost 13 service members their lives and injured hundreds more. That's not winning a war. And frankly, they continue to hide their incompetence behind the valor of our troops. This is what this is all about. And he continues to hype this up, and they say whatever they want. But we know we have a liar for a president and obviously a liar for a Secretary of Defense as well.
He also suggested that the reason the American people don't support this war is because of the misinformation that Democrats are putting out there. Senator Tammy Duckworth, I really appreciate you coming out and taking the time to talk to us. Thank you.
Pete Hegseth was back on Capitol Hill today, facing lawmakers who pressed him on the deeply unpopular war with Iran. Here's Hegseth when he was asked about the alarming reporting that the U.S. military has depleted a significant amount of munitions in just the first 60 days of war.
How many years to replenish? That's the question. I think that's exactly the right question, too, Senator, because the time frame we were existing under was unacceptable. Okay, well, and what this budget does, months and years, fast. Years. We're building new plants in real time. So just to replace what we have expended. I said months. And then you said years. It depends on the weapon system, but 2 to 3, 4x of what we have today. Okay. So, yes, we're dealing with the reality under the previous administration of what they sent to Ukraine and what they allocated elsewhere.
Okay, I got it. So we fired years worth of munitions. And it is clear that these are being expended to try to achieve some objectives. That was the plan. But, Mr. Secretary, this war is stuck.
Difficult and inconvenient truths there presented to Pete Hegseth by Senator Mark Kelly. Joining our coverage is Margaret Donovan. She served as a captain in the Army, serving in the 101st Airborne Division. Later in 5th Special Forces Group, she was captain in the JAG Corps and is the former assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Connecticut. She's now a visiting lecturer at Yale Law. Miles is still here. Miles, that's intimidating. I'm sorry to make you appear with Margaret and Oliver.
Yikes. I'll just tap out.
As I was reading, I was like, and Miles. No, we love you, Miles. We love we love you. What is your sense of how revelatory Hegseth's 2 days were on Capitol Hill?
Well, for example, the clip that we just saw, I'm so grateful to Senator Kelly for asking those questions, because that has been sort of an untold story of this, is that this is a discretionary war, which means that everything that we are doing in this war, every munition that we are expending, are ones that we could have and should have been stockpiling. And I can just give you some numbers. There are reports that we have lost 24 MQ-9 Reaper drones in this war. That's about 10% of the U.S. fleet. The Gulf states, not the U.S., but the Gulf states, have expended, I think, 2,000 Patriot interceptors. Those are basically air defense systems that the U.S. produces. The annual production rate of those is about 600 a year globally. So if we have expended 2,000 since February 28th, that tells you where those stockpiles are. And they exist for a reason. There is a very real regional threat, the Indo-Pacific threat, that the Gulf states and the United States want to make sure that they are prepared for. And so that is one of the costs. We can talk all day about how successful we are militarily, and that's great. But understand that there are necessary costs to being militarily successful. And those costs are, we are down on stockpiles that are very important to national defense. And to the Secretary's comments the clip that we just played, this administration declined to send things like precision-guided bomb units to Ukraine, saying that we didn't have enough in our own stockpiles. And that was before we started a war with Iran. So there are a lot of inconsistencies here. And if the purpose of these hearings is to determine, should we keep funding the Department of Defense? Is our money being used wisely? Those are questions that Secretary Hegseth really should have answered more directly and honestly. I think you can probably share this opinion. I don't know if Pete Hegseth knows the answers to those things. I don't think if he knows much of substance at all about the military. He's very big on culture wars and images, but I don't think he actually has any like long-term strategic vision or even deep knowledge of how the military operates.
I mean, the Atlantic reporting suggests J.D. Vance doesn't think he does either.
That would be consistent, I think, with most people's impressions. And like, look, he was a largely unqualified candidate for this, which itself isn't fatal. You can surround yourself with experienced people, but we also see him firing very experienced people who could help him in times when he maybe needs to lean on people with more experience than he does.
What is the sort of geopolitical? I mean, these aren't state secrets. I mean, this was a televised hearing. China could see it. Russia could see it. What are the geopolitical implications of it being known the world over that America is low on bombs?
Well, it's certainly not good. And so I understand that he may not want to admit that. But the fact of the matter is he is there asking for Congress for money to fund the next fiscal year and to fund the war. He's asking for $1 trillion budget. And so you have to be frank and transparent. He's under oath in these hearings with what the actual state of our national security is. And, this is why you have to be really careful about going to war, right? Because these are the costs that you incur, that a country incurs when it goes to war. You're going to have vulnerabilities necessarily when you expend some of your most important strengths. And there was reporting, and I don't know if I didn't watch the entire hearing today. I don't know if it was asked about, but at the end of the last fiscal year, he was spending something like millions on lobster tail and ribeye and all kinds of things to basically run out the clock and burn the budget before the fiscal year ended. So I hope he answers those questions as well, is why wasn't that put towards something more important, more useful, something that could stabilize us in a very destabilizing state?
Miles, Trump is obsessed with men like Mark Milley. He was obsessed with the coverage, I think, in The Atlantic and in Bob Woodward's book, and the criticism from men like Mark Milley and former Chief of Staff John Kelly and Secretary Mattis, who described him as, quote, dictatorial to the core. And then I think General Kelly went on to say he meant, quote, every technical definition of a dictator. And I used to think he was stung by that criticism because it made him look bad. He wasn't mad that they described him as a dictator. He just wanted somebody who would let him play dictator as president. And I've spent months trying to understand why Pete Hegseth, who is actually more ludicrous in the flesh than Colin Jost is on SNL, why he's still there when they've thrown Kristi Noem is laying under the bus next to Pam Bondi, next to the labor lady whose husband was banned from the building. Why is Hegseth still there? The war has destroyed his political coalition. He's still there because he lets Trump be the dictator he's always wanted to be.
Yes, he's still there because from him, Donald Trump does not get resistance. He gets praise and flattery, and he gets, from Pete Hegseth, compliance. That's what he gets. That's what he wants. But we're also seeing, like the world is a petri dish, Nicole, the consequences of that experiment. Because when there were people willing to push back against the president, people with 4 stars on their shoulders who said, I've been in war. You don't want to start one here. It's bad. Well, now we know what that looks like. I mean, just think about the position Donald Trump has put us in. Even if we were winning in Iran, regardless of what's going on in Iran, geostrategically, we are now all in on this one theater, the biggest military buildup in the Middle East since our 2003 invasion of Iraq. And every single missile we're firing at Tehran is one that can't be fired back at Beijing or Moscow if another conflict breaks open. That's something that John Kelly or Jim Mattis would have said. If you're going to go all in here, it puts us at grave risk. If another conflict opens up, it stretches us thin. But that's not the only thing, because in doing this, Nicole, we've also burned our alliances. That's part of the calculus you've got to understand here. If another crisis erupts, if it's China trying to take Taiwan, if it's a takeover of a country that we're not seeing coming, if it's Moscow going into Eastern Europe, here's the thing. We've burned our allies. Spain shut us out of its bases because of this. Overflight in different countries has been restricted. The conditions you would want with a closeness to our allies are not going to be there. These are really, really big consequences that any experienced military figure would have seen coming by taking on this conflict.
It's amazing that that is the state of affairs with our allies.